All right. Well, I'm gonna get started because we have a lot of cool conversations to have. Welcome everybody. My name is Taylour Chang, and I serve as co-curator of Artists of Hawaii Now, along with a colleague, Marlene Sue. And it's my honor to be able to welcome everybody to the virtual space for this first artist talk of this series with three incredible artists featured in the show and our wonderful guest curator, Josh Tengan. Um, if folks haven't yet seen the exhibition, we encourage you to do so. It's on view now. Artists of Hawaii Now is HoMA's current major exhibition, and it'll be open until January 2022, January 16th. It features 18 local artists and 13 installations in two of our largest gallery spaces. And the three artists that we have today are actually physically in the same space and very similar space in one of the galleries. And each artist, as you will, if you've already experienced, you will learn, are incredibly courageous and bold in confronting themes that are challenging and risk-taking, but necessary. And it was always part of, our vision for Artists of Hawaii Now to bring together artists with diverse experiences and perspectives and artistic mediums to create these kind of unique snapshots of the level of innovation and creativity that exists in our community, and a kind of snapshot that maybe people maybe wouldn't expect. And it's our intention for these artist talks to open up dialogue around both the contrasts and the similarities between each artist and their work. And each artist has their own unique individual strong voice, and at the same time they are in community in relationship to each other. And so what we're doing today is we're collectively holding space for that dialogue to emerge and to just sort of honor and respect whatever it is that emerges from this conversation, whether it's tension, whether it's any range of emotion, whether it's synergy, and ultimately inspiration, to hold it, to move through it, and then grow from it. So that's the spirit that we're coming to this virtual talk today. And thank you so much for being here. And just a few housekeeping notes. Before we begin, essentially there'll be three parts to tonight's talk. The first part is our guest moderator Josh is gonna share his response and insight of Artists of Hawaii Now, and each artist will share a little bit about their work and their piece in the exhibition. And then in the second part, it'll be a moderated conversation with the artists and Josh Tengan. And then at the final section, we'll take audience questions. And if you'd like to ask an audience question, we ask that you drop that question in the Q&A feature. And we will get to as many questions as we can at the end. But feel free to drop any questions in the chat at any point throughout the conversation. This is being live streamed right now via Facebook. And if you do want to ask a question, we do encourage you to join the Zoom webinar link and then to drop the question in the chat there versus like in the chat on Facebook. So thank you all for helping us with that. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce our incredible beloved guest moderator, Josh Tengan, who is a Honolulu born and based art curator. Since 2015, he has worked with local and Native Hawaiian artists through the arts nonprofit Pu'uhonua Society to deliver Hawaii's largest annual thematic contemporary art exhibition, Contact, which offers a critical and comprehensive survey of local contemporary art. He recently served as assistant curator of the 2019 Honolulu Biennial and currently supports Hawaii Contemporary as an exhibition manager for the Hawaii Triennial in 2022, which is opening in February, so don't miss it. And finally, he has worked with Nemea Hawaii and Native Books as a project manager, helping to open and manage their new space at the Arts and Letters Building and Gallery in Chinatown. He's the perfect person to really help us kick off these artist talks and to guide us through this conversation. So thank you so much, Josh. And I'm gonna hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Taylour, and mahalo to Arlene as well. Congratulations to the both of you, this exhibition. And yeah, it's my pleasure to, and my privilege to kick off these artist conversations. As Taylor mentioned, Josh Tengan, was born and raised and currently live in Pauoa, Kona, Oahu, just road from Honolulu Museum. I grew up coming to the museum quite often, for fun, with family, on school trips. Artists of Hawaii exhibition was always a favorite and an exciting show to attend. Yeah, I just want to offer a few like just general observations on the show. So Artists of Hawaii has been around since 1949. And while the format of the Artists of Hawaii has changed over the years, each iteration offers a survey and or a snapshot of what is happening in contemporary art in Hawaii today. The show has a weight and a seriousness and an expectation that comes with the title to represent the vast and varied art practices of Hawaii today in 2021. For each iteration, the curator, or in this case, the curatorial team, brings a unique vision and lens to the project. The politics of inclusion and exclusion of art, artists, and practices shapes what museum publics understand as being relevant and timely and excellent in Hawaii today. Artists of Hawaii Now, the title of this iteration, the word now expresses an added sense of urgency, not just in terms of art, but in the issues that we face today in Hawaii. And that's kind of one of the first things they know in this show, from housing to houselessness, urban development, aina, inability, decolonization, Mauna Kea and TMT, to issues of domestic violence, gender and power, and more. These are just some of the issues impacting us daily in Hawaii. And so I would argue that Artists of Hawaii also shapes visitors' understanding, our understanding of Hawaii itself. This term, Artists of Hawaii, is kind of a general, vague, and inclusive category that kind of washes over the kind of complexities of what it means to be in relationship to this place. But as a curator living and working in Hawaii, I'm interested in what it means to be of Hawaii. What does it mean to make work in Hawaii and or about Hawaii today? So with that, I'd like to introduce each of our artists today. I'll read their bio and then hand it over to them to talk about them, introduce themselves and their relationship to this place, as well as to give an overview of their Artists of Hawaii project. So with that, we'll start with Kawila Mahi. Daniel Kawila Mahi is an Oiwi Hawaii visual artist, researcher, video designer, and composer from Honolulu, Hawaii. Kawila's research creation embodies genealogical rhythms of sovereignty, solidarity, ceremony, and contested governance through Olelo Hawaii. Their work traverses through an indigenous future while refusing state-sponsored violent reproductions of militarism and missionaries. Kawila's work is inspired by his matriarchal genealogy of laymakers, feather workers, and Hawaiian sovereignty photographers. So mahalo Kawila, and I'll turn it over to you to talk about your piece, Kuikawalakii.
Mai ka hua e ana o Berhle I lo'ihi I kai hohonu a hiki aku I ke o Berhle I lehua ala pili mai ke aloha ia kākou pakahi a kau. Aloha from everywhere in Hawaii, from the depth of the ocean where lo'ihi is pushing out Berhle to where Berhle is older in Mehua ala, just off of Kauwila. My name is Daniel Kauwila Mahi. I come from Honolulu, and I'm based a lot in Mauna Lua, or what is now referred to as Hawaii Kai, or Hawaii Kai, actually. And most of my research has to do, and my art has to do with plasticity, or how things can outlive and reproduce themselves across generations. And so my piece, Kuikawalakii, is inspired by one particular mo'olelo from Mo'olelo, Hawaii, or as we know it today, or most people know it today as Ruling Chief. And it focuses on this ki'i, Kawilamahi, and my iteration of it, which is ki'i where many people are scared to strike. And many people are scared to strike it because in the mo'olelo, it stands 8 feet tall atop the cliff Kauwiki in Kawilakahi in HoMA. And as it's standing up there every night, guarding over Ki'ilani and many of the warriors of Maui, there's only one person who goes on after many moons to want to go on and strike this image, or actually, we still think it's a person. And his name is Pi'imai Va'a, and he was raised and taken in by Umiali Loa, one of the forefathers of all chiefly families, and most would say all Hawaiian in Hawaii and Kanaka Maoli. After he's taken in, he becomes a really great warrior and eventually ends up being the person that makes changes in the wars or battles that Umiali Loa goes through. But in this particular instance, Pi'imai Va'a alone goes to Kauwiki, climbs up the ulili, which is a stair on top of the cliff. And as he's climbing up, he's swinging a kahu'elapo, which is a really famous and incredulous club. That means dirt duster, or the demarcator of the sacred. And as he's walking up as he's climbing up the ladder, he's swinging this as a challenge to Kawalakii to say, I'm better than you and I can take you down. And as he gets up there, he keeps going. And as he gets there, he strikes it before knowing that it's only a structure and it's not a person, and therefore an image of a structure. And after he realizes that it's a structure, he pushes it off of the cliff, Kauwiki. And essentially, after this move, the Maui is Lonoa Ki'ilani's to rule. And really what this Akua Kawalakii as a tiki is an Akua for overthrows. And so the reason I printed this ki'i is to look at these really abstract concepts that many of us have issues kind of grasping, things like colonialism, imperialism, patriarchy, capitalism. All of these things are sometimes too abstract for us to look at, but when we start to shift our lens or shift and try to strike it in the same way Pi'imai Va'a did inside of the mo'olelo, then we can look at it as something that we can take tangible steps towards changing or shifting and potentially overthrowing. So this ki'i is carved out by this mo'olelo and many others, and it's a 2-foot tall ki'i that is printed in PLA plastic. And it's one of the very few ki'i with a club or even anything in its hand. And my rendition of it is inspired by ki'i and tiki that come from Ku and Kanaloa. And I'm actually heavily influenced by the culture I'm in, and that influenced the culture I grew up with, which is hip hop and like streetwear. And so I actually took some dances, some positionings and poses from Bear Brick Toys. And on the back, there's a peva spine that demarcates 7 mana, or what would be things that would demarcate the year on a heiau. And so those peva and those mana represent 7 pivotal points in my life where I found solidarity to be necessary, but also places where I can see that we all can make change. So yeah, that's Kuikawalakii. Mahalo.
Mahalo, Kawila. I like that idea of the akua of overthrow, and how, you know, overthrow is always this thing that I think this idea of something that happened to Hawaiians has happened to a nation, and kind of turning that on its head a little, maybe. All right, well, next I want to introduce Juvana Soliven. Juvana is a visual artist and educator from Honolulu, Hawaii. Sullivan's work subverts and utilizes object languages to speak to issues regarding intimacy, labor, and women's positionality within patriarchal systems. Sullivan completed an MFA in metalsmithing at Cranbrook Academy of Art in 2016, a BFA in sculpture at the University of Hawaii at Manoa in 2013, and studied art restoration and conservation at Lorenzo de' Medici International School in Florence, Italy in 2012. Sullivan teaches in the Department of Art and Art History at the University of Hawaii at Manoa and in the Department of Fine Arts at Chaminade. So mahalo, Juvana. Juvana will be sharing about her work, Body Weaponized.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm Juvana Soliven. I was born and raised here in Honolulu, Hawaii. Of course, I went away for grad school for a bit, but decided it was really important for me to come back and teach here and give back to the community that helped me become who I am. And especially take care of students that were kind of like me growing up here, and children to immigrant families, Indigenous people, people who might not feel so represented in academia. I felt that it was necessary for me to be here and be that person for them that they can relate to. In the work that I have in Artists of Hawaii now, it's Body Weaponized. The installation is based off of the way an armory might be organized. All the forms in this are inspired by any mixture of weapons, mostly hand-to-hand combat weapons, some gynecological instruments, as well as parts of the censored body. So I wanted to, in my practice, I tend to kind of merge these object languages so that they can speak to each other. In this work, this sort of layering of these object languages speaks to the inequities that women are subjected to in a patriarchal society. This patriarchal violence is disproportionately felt by poor, Black, Indigenous, incarcerated women of color, and trans women. So I wanted to speak to those in this work. I want to speak to those issues. And yeah, I think that's the synopsis for now that I'd love to share, and we can talk more about that later. Thank you.
Hello, Juvana. And last we have Andy Berhle. Andy Berhle lives and creates in Waimea on Hawaii Island. Born and raised outside of Boston, Massachusetts, he has chased professional aspirations, personal growth, and creative inspirations around the United States before settling in the Hawaiian Islands. While in pursuit of his MFA in sculpture, Burley turned to creating time-based environments and installations to explore time's passage and nature cycles. In recent years, he has been creating experiential installations using light, sound, and digital video, while also developing intimate sculptures that use cutting-edge technologies to make the imperceivable realities of our world tangible. So mahalo nui, Andy, who will be sharing with us on his work, Hae Aloha.
Thank you very much. It's an absolute pleasure to be a part of this exhibition and to share the stage with everybody here. Again, I'm Andy Berhle. I live here in Waimea on Hawaii Island. I have taken a circuitous route throughout my life to be where I am today. I arrived in the islands in 2018 from rural Washington State, where I lived for 5 years and created work that was inspired by the landscape and histories of the Pacific Northwest. And before that, I lived in Alabama for 4 years, where again, I responded to the world that I was living in, which was unlike any that I'd been to before. And before that, I went to graduate school in Arizona, where I sought out the vastness of nature in the desert. Being from the Boston area, I have always been drawn to the vastness of the ocean, but yearned for new experiences and to be exposed to different places and different traditions. And the desert seemed like a perfectly different place for me to explore and to think about vastness and to think about my place in the world and our place in history. I'm a newcomer to Hawaii, and with that, I feel it's really important for me to dive into learning about the history of this place. As an outsider, it can feel pretty uncomfortable to learn about some of the history of Hawaii. After all, I come from the place where whalers sailed from to capture their fortunes. I come from the same place that people, that missionaries sailed from to Christianize the islands. I come from the same place that brought diseases and exploitation and invasive species and intolerance. And I come from the same place that stole this land from its people. And that's a weight that I am trying to understand and explore and impart through this work. What we're looking at on the walls of the museum, first and foremost, is a quilt that was made 100 years ago by a woman whose name is lost to history. She created this flag quilt. Almost certainly it was a she, it was a woman who made this. And that's about all that we know of her, except that it's about 100 years old. The history of flag quilts is something that I was not introduced to until a few years ago. And through this art form, I've learned more about the overthrow of the Hawaiian kingdom and the resistance to annexation that these quilts were created by their artists to represent. And I've been drawn to, I was immediately drawn to Hawaiian quilts when I first arrived here. The design qualities, the patterns drew me in immediately, and I needed to learn more. And in wanting to learn more about the patterns, I learned a lot more about the history of here. I learned more about canoe plants and royal iconography. I learned pieces of language that are not mine. And I learned fragments of ancient wisdoms. And everywhere that I've lived and everywhere that I've worked and created site-specific projects for, I've tried to key into what those stories are of each place, the ancient stories, the more modern stories, and see what that all means, how they all come together to create the world that we're in right now. The quilt, the qualities of the quilt that really stuck out to me as we poured through the archives of the museum to choose a piece from the collection that would inspire my work and inform my work. I was drawn to, you can see the echo style or the, I'm sorry, you can see the echo stitchwork that follows along the inside panel of the flag quilt. If you turn to another slide, we might be able to see that a little clearer. You can kind of see it here. In that echo stitchwork, I see the movement of water, and that's what I saw first and foremost. And the more that I learned about the Hawaiian quilt tradition, the more I realized that I'm not the first person to have noticed that. That's a kind of ubiquitous thought to it. And I've been creating some works for the last 8 years that investigate design patterns from the different places that I've lived, different places that I've been invited to do projects for, and connecting it to water resources, ecological ideas, and so it seemed like a very small leap for me to start thinking about creating a quilt that used the waters of this place and this time to connect both to the original artist and her amazing work, and to pay tribute to her artistry, and put a spotlight on and to honor her and her intentions and her capabilities. At the same time, I'm really interested in what how the waters and how we have used water throughout the history of human occupation of the islands has changed the islands and has changed the people who've lived here. I captured video footage from 50 locations throughout the islands to create my project. There are 6 compositions, 5 for individual islands of Hawaii and Maui and Kaho'olawe and Oahu and Kauai, and a 6th composition that combines footage from all 5. In doing so, I visited sacred sites, ancient fish ponds, ports, streams, irrigation ditches, reservoirs, national parks, roadside vistas, all sorts of places that have been altered in some way by us at some point in time, mostly with the intention of bettering our lives. I'm interested in how those intentions don't always yield the consequences that we think that they will. And I'm interested in how each location has a series of histories embedded in them. And I wanted to learn about each of those histories and each of those places. And this project gave me an opportunity to do that. And I'm forever grateful for the support that the museum has given me in pursuing this work, in collaborating with me to best try and tell the story of the quilt itself and learn more about this new home of mine. And I also really need to thank another artist named Mel Belgray, who captured a lot of footage for me in Kauai when travel was impossible. Without Mel's work, a big part of the project would have been missing for me. And I need to also make sure that I thank Kirk, the Kaho'olawe Island Reserve Commission, for inviting me to access Kaho'olawe, and they shared their wisdom with me and gave me one of the most meaningful experiences of my professional and personal life. Thanks.
Mahalo, Andy. Mahalo to all our artists. Hello, everyone's back. Yeah, I think I just kind of want to jump into questions to kind of get our conversation started. As a reminder, if any of the audience has questions, please feel free to enter them in the question and answer section. Also include your name and your location if you can. To join the conversation with us, so mahalo. A question I wanted to ask was for Kawila and Juvana. Both of your projects involve or play with this idea of the weapon. Kawila, in your case, you represent the club of Kuikawalakii as well as Pi'i Maiva'a's war club Kahua, which players feel in your game that is against an enemy that is not a person, but a structure. Jovanna, in your project, you're building an entire armory of weapons, which are hybrids of gynecological instruments and weaponry. And you've said in your artist statement that the condition of being a woman has always been a weapon. I'm wondering if you both can talk about what these weapons represent, who are these weapons for, and who or what are the structures that these weapons are to be used against. Feel free, one of you guys can take it. Kawila.
Yeah, I'll jump on. So yeah, these 2 weapons, in Kuikawalakii's case, the weapon is not named in Kama'olelo, Hawaii. But the weapon that Pi'i Maiva'a has is actually a lot older than Pi'i Maiva'a. It comes from Kauai originally. It's from the Mo'olelo, or the story of Behrle, and Kawelo Ku, I believe. He has it, and basically doing magic with this club, going around beating up people, getting into scrap. So he's like a really feisty youngster. And one of the things that this mo'olelo and this particular weapon is used for is to uncover what are the things that are sacred in our life. How do we demarcate them? And how do we use those things that we have a sacred relationship with? And how do we, when we are more intimate with them, what are the steps that we can take with this intimate relationship through those tools? In this case, what you're using is your phone to establish relationships with others, to dismantle a system. And so the easy way to say that is the weapon that you have, in this case, Kahu'elepo, which I made the phone and the augmented reality app, is one where you weaponize your relationships with each other. And this kind of takes on, when you weaponize your relationships, you can revolutionize consciousness by having these really intimate interactions with how to take tangible steps to making change in communities. And when you make these tangible steps, you have somebody that you're accountable for too now. And so realistically, this weapon, which in this case is a phone, takes on, it really pushes class. I mean, it's only iPhone, only available on iPhone for people who are within this certain class. I'm calling them out and saying, you have this weapon in your hand all the time. Why aren't you doing more? Like, and it's part of that too, is to look at really establishing a pivotal point in this time where we have to look at our relationships with each other, how we build them in order to sustain what we feel is sacred to us and is sacred to us, and ensure we have a way to protect it so that it will live on way past all of us. Yeah.
I think about the phone. Hey, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I was gonna like jump in. I didn't know if that was like
no, go for it. Jump in, Jovanna.
So the way that I'm representing weapons in my work, they're all manifestations of just societal oppression. Women, when you do see the work, you'll see that all of these weapons are also encased in these egg crate foam cases. I made that decision to hold it that way because I wanted to relate the weapons not only to the way that one would like secure a gun in a gun case with the egg crate foam, but also it's the exact kind of foam that you find in bed lining. So I wanted to kind of make the weapon and the body as one. So like the body is representative of the trauma inflicted. And I think you asked us who it's for, right? Who these weapons are for. And of course, they're not practical weapons. They're not like really useful as weapons, but they're more symbolic and metaphorical. And I think it's for everyone. It's everyone in community has to work together to fight patriarchal oppression. That's how I feel about that. I think that, of course, like people will have different access points into the work based on their own experience, either with their body or their own experience with going to a doctor's office, or even their own experience with like what these weapons are even referring to, like what kind of weapons they are. So I think through all those different access points, someone can figure out how they can be implemented and used.
Yeah, I think you guys both talk about weapons and community. And Jovanna, you kind of highlighted that the need for everyone to participate. And Kawila, you talk about the weapon or the phone as something that is not a privilege, right? But to have and to connect with people. I think Jovanna, to go back to something you were talking about a little earlier, we're in the US, the US is still kind of reckoning with this problematic racial history. And we're seeing monuments fall across the US. in 2018, I was doing a little research and that, J. Marion Sims, a kind of strong reference point for you in this work. His sculpture or his monument in Central Park was removed in 2018. And for those who don't know about Sims, could you talk a little bit about the kind of racist history of racism in gynecology?
Yes, when I speak to how violence disproportionately affects Black women, incarcerated women, Indigenous women, it's because of this like very real history of J. Marion Sims conducting these experiments on these women who have been enslaved, and would perform these really painful procedures without anesthesia, without providing them any dignity of coverage in front of other people, because they just felt like they fundamentally believed that Black women had the physiology to handle that, and also didn't have the inherent dignity to even care that they were on display. So they were allowed to like perform all these abuses on these women time and time again. Like, so multiple procedures on the same woman. I'm getting emotional. Thank you for holding space for me to be emotional. Yeah, and they perform these procedures on these people because they had to do it on these people before they could deem it even safe or appropriate to perform on a white woman. I think the patriarchy harms everyone, men, like women, everyone, but it has disproportionately, historically, and now affect some more than others. Thank you for letting me be emotional.
No. Thank you. Your work really has highlighted histories for me that I never understood before. But I kind of want to switch gears a little about your work. Your work is one of the few in the exhibition where you can really kind of see it and unique and your skill that really creates these interesting tensions between hard and soft, beauty and pain, and dominance and submission. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little more about the importance of craft in your work, and also touch on these tensions that you're creating.
Yes, I really have an investment in the made object and the behavioral qualities of materials. I also have an investment in craft as a lens and a language. In the work, there's both fiber art and metalsmithing in the work. And I think that these two languages really kind of highlight different issues I'm thinking about. Fiber art, of course, is something that has been utilized in a lot of feminist art, especially with weaving, domestic labor, as well as it's just like a cultural inheritance to like inherit these skills in mending from like your parents or grandparents, especially like your mothers and grandmothers. So I wanted to highlight that this endurance of the craft and this endurance of this closeness to materiality. The beading that you see in the work, it's multiple small beads, and I think of that symbolically with like how much effort, how it takes so many pieces to make a whole, and sometimes like even failing to make a whole because we're still fighting the fight, right? So maybe what the systems we have in place are still not enough. So that's kind of what I'm playing with in the language of the fiber work. With the metalsmithing has been associated with making armor, making weapons, but also very much associated with making jewelry, which is adornment. So when it comes to adornment, I'm really interested in the language of beauty and pretty, and how beauty can be a package. It's a package to seduce. So that's also a tool that I'm using to kind of maybe in a way manipulate the audience in a way that women have been manipulated historically to take on these things that aren't great because they're posed as something that is good for you, like birth control trials or procedures that they're coerced into. I guess I wanted to play a bit on that coercion by seducing people with the beauty to bring them into a real reality that the work they're looking at is about trauma and violence. So I'm interested in the packaging of it all.
Yeah. Yeah, you touched on this idea of inheritance that I want us to hold on to, and it's a strand that kind of runs through, I think, a theme that runs through all of your work. But yeah, thank you for sharing a bit about your process, Juvana. I think, process isn't something that is really thought about when you talk about art and technology and new media. So Andy and Kawila, I think it's a process is often overlooked, and it's more kind of thinking about the final product or the experience that new media provides. Museum publics love us like a spectacle, So I'm wondering if you guys can touch a little bit on process. Andy, you mentioned, you're from Boston, where the first missionary sail from in 1819, almost 200 years ago. It's crazy to think about that history, but bringing with them the tradition, among other things. So I'm wondering if you could touch a little bit more on your process of selecting that Hae Aloha quilt. Also, I just want to note that, we're at the 6:43 mark, and we're clearly going a little over time here. So thank you all, whoever's tuning in, for bearing with us. But yeah, Andy, thank you.
Sure. Yeah. My process is an open one. My mantra is that I follow the work. And so I get an idea for a project, and especially for this one, was when I saw the call for artists and the call for project proposals. I had already been thinking about this project in my mind, but I really wanted to have a partner in it, a collaborator in it, and not just be drawing upon the iconography and the traditions of here, but in making something that was sort of like a Hawaiian flag quilt, or my rendition of one, because it's not my imagery. It's not necessarily mine to create from zero. And so the museum's collection seemed like that perfect collaborator, so long as we were all going to be open to how the process would work its way out. So yeah, we set forth to look for a quilt in the vaults that otherwise wouldn't have been put on display, and to tap into the artistry of an object that's not necessarily discarded, but something that is kept to be studied for later, but isn't meant for display. And because being a former museum professional, I am drawn to the vaults and drawn to the history of all these objects that aren't the showcase pieces, because there's so much showcase beauty in those objects. We pulled, I think, 4 or 5 quilts using photographs first, and then they pulled them from the vault for us to take a look at in person. And I think the one that's on display now that informed my work was actually accidentally pulled from the rack, which ended up being this moment of serendipity. It was unfurled, and I was like, I don't recognize this one, but this is unbelievable. And the stitch work and all of that. And from there, the process of capturing footage is one that I had already been in the process of. I've been collecting footage for years from every place that I go and every place that I've lived. And since before even moving to the islands, I was collecting footage of the places that I had visited. And so I don't go into capturing footage with any preconceived notions of what I'm looking for. I'm in a place, I want to experience it and the colors and textures that are unique to it, and then capture what's there. And sometimes I choose locations that I'm interested in putting into the narrative of a work that I think would be an important part of a story. But most of the time, I'm looking for serendipitous moments, and then from there, I dive into the history of what is this place? What is it geologically? What is it historically? What is it culturally? And really submerge myself in the place. And over the course of the last 2 years, kind of using footage I'd already gathered and trying to get to places to gather more footage, the piece started to just kind of fall into place, as it were. You know, when I went to Kawila Mahi to shoot footage, you know, I kind of had in my mind, I'd love to get footage from this particular place. This is a really important spot, this particular spot, and had in my mind what I had hoped to find there, and that always ends up being a tricky thing to navigate. And what I end up with is always much more interesting to me than what I thought I was going to get. And so I remain open to what's presented to me, and then see how those pieces fall together.
Yeah, what I learned recently about your work is that a lot of the video footage is actually, you know, totally edited. It's raw, yeah. And it's kind of honoring it's like a pure sort of, I guess, capture.
Yeah, it's really important to me to do everything I can to not manipulate it after I've captured it. You know, there's tricks with the camera to make something look a little more red, or, you know, a little more dynamic than maybe it would have looked without a setting here or there. But yeah, it's really important to me to capture it, and then that's what it is, and then it's there for me to use.
I think what you touched on, and the maybe unintended outcomes of your piece, was that you were able to bring this work out of the vault, and it wasn't to be seen. And maybe I'll add, there are actually 19 artists in the room, or in the exhibition, although unnamed. So to bring this quilt out and to put it in conversation with Kupuna, who Mauna Kea, to put it in conversation with Kawila's piece, is quite powerful. So
I think that so many of the works in the exhibit owe a tribute to the work of the artists that made these quilts, and that there's this direct relationship that I was really pleased to see in person. Like, once I saw the images of the work come together and the shows, it felt good to bring that out, to be a part of that.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think thinking about quilting, like, just that this quilt is in the show, and typically, traditional arts maybe is something that's sidelined a bit in Artists of Hawaii exhibition, and it's not contemporary enough. It's not it's in between that contemporary traditional binary that we often that most Indigenous artists often face. So I think to have this piece here is no mistake. It's important. So with that, I'm gonna turn maybe the conversation to you, Kawila. Process. Olelo and Okuauhau are inherent in your work, this. Can you talk a little bit about how genealogy and history and stories shape your process?
Yeah. Genealogy, Mo'olelo, Olelo Hawaii, really shape how I understand the world. I think a lot of my art is actually influenced by my family. My tutu is actually my great grandma. She's a lei hulu maker. We used to go to craft fairs and she would sell them on Maui. And she's actually one of the biggest lei makers from Maui. And she pretty much made a living off of it, selling them to Kamehameha schools for song contests. And she was pretty much the sole lei maker for like a long time. My mom was a Hawaiian movement photographer all throughout the 1990s. So I've influenced heavily by these wonderful wahine in my life. And they're my foundation in how I look at the world and how I understand Mo'olelo, because they took the time and ensured that I knew Olelo too. But I bring in separate from them, but they help shape, is that I make sure that I pay close attention to protocol from history. I look up ceremonies before and try to do independent research with them and try to place them within the sphere of what is going on today, and trying to find something to pull from those traditional ceremonies that we need to use and need to bring back into today's Hawaii and the future of Hawaii. And so everything I do in my life is actually from Mo'olelo. And I think Olelo Hawaii carves out the aesthetic of every piece of art that I even try to analyze or create. And so part of my process, especially as I would say a new media artist or rooted in historical Mo'olelo or ki'i, or carving out ki'i in this case, is that I didn't change the protocols from those traditions. I still stayed up the whole night to do the ceremony as I'm carving out these ki'i on particular days, like Piko Oakea, when you need to consecrate a ki'i on a heiau. I still went through all of these steps and went through all of these processes that are traditional. It's just a new material, and it's a material that's going to outlive all of us realistically, because it's plastic. And I wanted to ensure that makahana te ike, what one of my kumu said, kumu via onio keave, is process is a product. So if you're gonna bring out something like Hinakua for overthrows, you better make sure you take your time in making sure you hit all the, or get all your aha. Make sure that you accomplish all the aha, or the things that you need to consecrate the ki'i, and for that ceremony to live on outside of what you're when I'm there with the piece. Mahalo.
Yeah, that idea of continuity and just being a part of that continuation of practice and culture is, yeah, very evident in your work. I do see we do have some questions in the chat, but I did want to ask, because this exhibition is so almost like future focused, and you guys are all kind of offering unique visions of what future looks like. I want to ask, like, what does futurism mean to you, or what does futurism? How is futurism represented in your practice? What does the future look like? Take any of those questions.
Well, for me, the future first looks to the past, to learn and to honor and to move forward. So that's a main thread to my project.
Juvana?
The future is anti-patriarchal, anti-colonized.
to quote one of my favorite writers, we live in the future, come join us.
Mm. All right, mahalo. Yeah, without just turning to a couple of the questions we have in the chat, Reese to ask the question. So I think Reese says it's amazing that the flag revealed itself. So I think in each of your processes, is there anything that happened that, is there anything that happened by chance or by fate that really shaped, I think in maybe to Juvana and Kawila? Were there moments of discovery?
Yeah, I mean, we were supposed to have this show in 2020, and I don't think I would have had the depth of research or just like things coming into my life that would have inspired the works in the way that it did with that extended amount of time that we had. So I was in like a lot of reading groups, and we were talking. I think Kay is somewhere watching this. So we're in reading groups about reading feminist works of bell hooks. And also another thing that came to me in this extended time was Gay Chan gave me a bunch of gynecological tools, just like boxes of them. So I got a lot of experience, inspiration from just looking at them in my space, and it was weird having them in my space. I definitely had to like pray near them. So because I don't know where they came from. Have to cleanse them in some way, but that came into my life then.
Kawila, I want to ask you because we talked about this a little in the lead up to this, but maybe this is a leading question. But I want you to share about there's a major kind of change that happened in your process of making your own piece. So if you maybe want to touch on a little bit about that.
Yeah. So the original piece I was going to do was to mimic from the Mo'olelo, 8-foot ki'i of Kuikawalakii, and it was printed, and it broke and it got thrown away. And all I'm gonna say about that is that it was a Hawai'i Lona. It was a sign and a signal from Kupuna that maybe the world's not ready for it yet, and potentially probably I wasn't ready for it yet for that kuleana. But what's good about being able to nalu shift with the changes of Hawai'i Lona and signs that Kupuna are giving is that it prepared me to make this ki'i more portable to potentially have that rally in case we need it for an overthrow. I don't know. That's what I think the Kupuna wanted, and I'm not going to say no to Kupuna because it's not going to be fun if I do.
Yes, not fun at all. I love that. I love that that story and that kind of visioning forward. So I think this is a great question to end on since we're at time almost. But we have a question from Kevin who asks, please share how creating these works has inspired your next projects. What are you working on next? So anybody can take that.
Oh, I can take that because I am working on new things now. This body of work was incredibly exhausting and emotionally draining to work on. Yeah. Sometimes like in the process, like people ask me like, oh, like it must be so fun to be an artist and get to do what you love all the time. And it's like, no, I'm really sad in my studio having to like do this research. So like, I mean, right. But the thing that I fell in love with while I was working on this was all the beading. So working on some work with all Black beads. Currently at Downtown Art Center is like the start of a new body of work. But it's more to come.
I used 20 video segments that I captured and that Melbell Gray helped me capture. But I have about 200. And so I'm revisiting that archives and thinking about making sort of a wiki site for an open source use of them and to tell the stories of each place and the time that it was captured, and also using just individual clips in multiples to create textile designs and patterns, and then see what to do with those once they're kind of made.
I want to get back into street art and actually making application-based information through street art. And so I'm not saying what that is, but it'll be around.
Nice. All right. Well, we'll be following you and let us know when it drops. Well, I think with that, I want to thank each of you for being in conversation today. Thank you for your unique perspectives and positions. And Taylour, mahalo. Oh, I see the little peva you got there. Is it a peva? Ah, nice. So mahalo, everyone. And don't forget, Artists of Hawaii is on view until January 16th, 2022, curated by Marlene Su and Taylour Chang. And this is just the first of a series of artist conversations. So be sure to tune in for the next one. So, mahalo, everyone.
And thank you so much, Josh. Mahalo nui, Josh, for guiding this conversation. It was epic. And thank you to Jovanna, Kawila, and Andy. Just so much gratitude to you three. This is like the perfect way to kick off these talks. So thank you all so much. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Aloha.